The dust swirled around Josephine Zeller's ankles as she stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching the worn handle of her carpetbag. The merciless Arizona sun beat down on her faded calico dress, now damp with sweat and stained with the red earth of the territory. 6 months pregnant and alone on the desolate trail to Whispering Creek, she felt her strength waning with each labored step. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life had drawn Josephine west after her husband's death left her with nothing but mounting debts and painful memories in Philadelphia. A distant cousin had written of opportunity in the small but growing settlement, where a school teacher was desperately needed. With her teaching certificate and the small sum she'd managed to save, Josephine had purchased a stagecoach ticket west, determined to build a life for herself and her unborn child. But the stagecoach had broken an axle 10 miles from town, and the driver, concerned about bandits in the area, had insisted they couldn't wait for repairs. "Whispering Creek's just beyond that ridge, madam," he'd said, pointing to a distant line of hills. "Follow the trail. You'll make it before sundown if you keep a steady pace." That had been hours ago. Now, as the afternoon heat intensified, Josephine's vision blurred. Her throat burned with thirst, her water canteen having run dry miles back. The baby shifted inside her, a reminder of her responsibility to survive. "Just a little further," she whispered, her voice cracking. The world tilted suddenly, and Josephine felt her knees buckle. The carpetbag fell from her grasp as she reached out to break her fall, her palms scraping against the rocky ground. She tried to rise, but her body refused to obey. "Please," she prayed, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Please help us." The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, but in her delirium, Josephine couldn't tell if they were real or imagined. She managed to lift her head, squinting against the glare. A silhouette appeared on the horizon, a lone rider approaching fast. Fear gripped her heart. Out here, a stranger could mean salvation or doom. With the last of her strength, Josephine attempted to crawl toward her carpetbag, where she kept a small Derringer pistol her late husband had insisted she carry. The rider drew closer, and through her haze, Josephine made out the broad shoulders of a man atop a chestnut mare. He wore a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt, a bandana around his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "Madam," his voice carried on the wind. "Madam, are you all right?" Josephine couldn't answer. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. The world spun faster now, dark spots dancing across her vision. The rider dismounted in a fluid motion, rushing to her side. As consciousness began to slip away, Josephine caught glimpses of concerned blue eyes beneath the hat brim, felt strong arms carefully turning her over. "You're pregnant," he said, his voice a mixture of concern and determination. "Hold on, madam. I've got you." Through the fog of near unconsciousness, Josephine felt herself being lifted, cradled against a solid chest. The scent of leather, horses, and something clean like soap surrounded her. "You'll never walk alone," the stranger's voice promised, low and steady in her ear. "Not while I draw breath, you hear me? You'll never walk alone again." As darkness claimed her, Josephine surrendered to the strength of the arms that held her, and the conviction in those words became her lifeline. When Josephine opened her eyes, the harsh sunlight had been replaced by the gentle glow of lamplight. She lay on a soft bed, a quilt tucked carefully around her. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The last thing she remembered was collapsing on the trail, the dust clinging to her skin, the unborn child within her seemingly the only thing tethering her to life. "You're awake," a deep voice observed. Josephine turned her head to find the source. A man sat in a wooden chair beside the bed, his hat resting on his knee. In the lamplight, she could finally see him clearly. Strong jawline covered in a few days' stubble, those same striking blue eyes she'd glimpsed before losing consciousness, and dark brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Where am I?" Josephine asked, her voice raspy with thirst. The man immediately reached for a glass of water on the bedside table. "My ranch, about 3 miles outside of Whispering Creek." He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back with a gentle hand as she drank. "I'm Samuel Zakowski. Most folks around here call me Sam." The water felt like heaven against her parched throat. "Josephine Zeller," she managed once she'd drunk her fill. Her hand instinctively went to her belly. "The baby is fine, according to Doc Patterson. He was here earlier while you were sleeping. Said you were suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing that rest and plenty of fluids won't fix." Sam's expression softened. "You gave me quite a scare out there, Mrs. Zeller." "Miss," she corrected automatically, then flushed. "My husband, he passed 6 months ago." Understanding crossed Sam's features. "I'm sorry for your loss." Josephine nodded, then looked around the room. It was simply furnished but clean and comfortable. A dresser stood against one wall, a washstand in the corner. The window was covered with checked curtains that stirred slightly in the evening breeze. "Is this your room, Mr. Zakowski?" "Sam, please." "And yes, but don't worry. I'll be bunking with my foreman until you're well enough to travel to town." He stood, setting his hat on the dresser. "Are you hungry? My housekeeper, Mrs. Flores, has been keeping a pot of stew warm since I brought you in." As if on cue, Josephine's stomach growled audibly. She blushed again, and Sam's mouth quirked into a smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'll take that as a yes." "Sit tight. I'll bring you a tray." When he left the room, Josephine took stock of her situation. Her dress had been replaced by a man's nightshirt, much too large for her frame. The thought of someone undressing her made her cheeks burn, but a quick assessment revealed she still wore her undergarments. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by embarrassment at her circumstances. Here she was, an unwed pregnant woman, dependent on the charity of a stranger. What must he think of her? And yet, his eyes had held no judgment, only concern. Sam returned with a tray bearing a steaming bowl of stew, thick slices of bread slathered with butter, and a cup of tea. "Mrs. Flores says you're to eat every bite," he said, setting the tray across her lap. "She's Mexican and firmly believes no problem exists that cannot be solved with food." Josephine smiled despite herself. "She sounds like a wise woman." The aroma of the stew made her mouth water, and she realized how truly hungry she was. "Thank you, Mr. Zakowski Sam, for everything. You saved our lives today." He waved off her gratitude, settling back into the chair. "Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Josephine met his gaze directly. "You said something to me when you found me, that I'd never walk alone." A shadow crossed Sam's face, and for a moment he looked away. "My mother used to say that. She raised 4 boys on her own after my father died in the war, taught us that nobody should have to face hardship alone." He cleared his throat. "Eat your stew before it gets cold." Josephine sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she focused on the food, which was delicious, rich with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots. Between bites, she explained about the teaching position in Whispering Creek, the stagecoach breaking down, and her desperate attempt to reach town on foot. "The school board is expecting me," she concluded. "I should send word that I've arrived, albeit not in the manner I intended." Sam nodded. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, let them know what happened. The schoolhouse isn't ready yet anyway, they're still finishing the roof. You have time to recover." "I've imposed enough," Josephine protested. Once I've rested, I can. Doc Patterson said at least 3 days of bed rest, Sam interrupted firmly. Those are doctor's orders, not mine, and it's no imposition. This house has been too quiet since my mother passed last winter. Josephine heard the grief in his voice and instinctively reached out, placing her hand on his. I'm sorry for your loss as well. Sam looked down at their hands, then gently pulled away, standing. You should rest. I'll check on you in the morning. After he'd gone, taking the empty tray with him, Josephine settled back against the pillows. The baby shifted inside her and she placed both hands on her rounded belly. We'll be all right, she whispered. We're not alone anymore. For 3 days, Josephine followed Dr. Patterson's orders, resting in Sam's comfortable bed. Mrs. Flores, a robust woman in her 50s with a perpetual smile and quick, efficient movements, tended to her needs, bringing meals and fresh water for washing, and helping her change into a simple cotton dress that had belonged to Sam's mother. It will do until your things arrive from town, Mrs. Flores had said, smoothing the fabric over Josephine's bump. Mr. Sam rode in yesterday and arranged for your carpet bag to be brought here. Mayor Thomas was very relieved to hear you were safe. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Josephine felt strong enough to venture from the bedroom. With Mrs. Flores's assistance, she made her way to the porch, where a rocking chair awaited her. The ranch spread out before her, a modest but well-maintained house, a large barn, corrals where horses grazed, and beyond, pastureland dotted with cattle. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. It's beautiful, Josephine murmured, settling into the rocker. Mr. Sam has worked hard to build it, Mrs. Flores said with obvious pride. His father left them nothing but debts and bad memories. He and his brother started with just 20 acres and 6 skinny cows. Now look. She gestured to the prosperous ranch. 3,000 acres, 500 head of cattle, and the finest horses in the territory. His brothers don't live here, Josephine asked, curious about the man who had saved her. No, they all moved on. Michael is a doctor in Denver, David runs a mercantile in Santa Fe, and Joshua joined the cavalry. Mrs. Flores shook her head. Only Sam stayed to care for their mother. She had consumption, bad lungs, could not travel. Before Josephine could ask more, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Sam rode toward the house, his hat pulled low against the sun. He dismounted in one fluid motion, patting the mare's neck before tying her to the hitching post. When he saw Josephine on the porch, his stride faltered for just a moment before he approached, removing his hat. Miss Zeller, it's good to see you up and about. Please call me Josephine. And yes, I'm feeling much better, thanks to your hospitality. Mrs. Flores excused herself to prepare dinner, leaving them alone. Sam leaned against the porch railing, turning his hat in his hands. I spoke with the school board, he said. They're eager to meet you, but understand you need time to recover. The boarding house in town has a room ready whenever you feel strong enough to move there. Josephine felt a twinge of disappointment at the thought of leaving the ranch, which surprised her. That's very kind of them. Perhaps in a day or two. Sam nodded, his expression unreadable. I also collected your carpet bag. He gestured toward the house. Mrs. Flores put your things in the dresser. Thank you. Josephine rocked gently, watching as the setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson. This is a magnificent place you've built, Sam. It's just a ranch, he said, but she could hear the pride in his voice. Mrs. Flores told me a little about how you started with almost nothing. That's impressive. Sam shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. We did what needed doing. My brothers helped until they found their own paths. And you stayed for your mother, Josephine said softly. His eyes met hers, surprised. Yes, she couldn't travel and someone had to look after her. That was very honorable of you. Sam's gaze dropped to her rounded belly. Your husband. If you don't mind my asking, what happened to him? Josephine's hand reflexively covered her bump. Thomas was a businessman. He invested in a railroad venture that failed. He lost everything, our savings, our home. The night he learned the company had gone bankrupt, he drank an entire bottle of whiskey and walked in front of a freight train. The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd had 6 months to process her husband's final, selfish act. Sam's expression darkened. He left you alone, and with child. He didn't know about the baby, Josephine said. I found out 2 weeks after the funeral. She sighed. His family blamed me for his financial ruin, said I was too extravagant, drove him to take risks. They wanted nothing to do with me or his child. That's wrong, Sam said, his voice hard. A man doesn't abandon his responsibilities, no matter what. Something in his tone made Josephine look at him more closely. There was anger there, but not directed at her. Not everyone is as honorable as you, Sam. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. Dinner should be ready soon. Would you like help getting back inside? Josephine started to refuse, then reconsidered. Actually, yes, I find I'm still a bit unsteady. Sam stepped forward, offering his arm. Josephine took it, acutely aware of his strength as she rose from the rocker. For a brief moment they stood close, her hand on his forearm, his other hand hovering near her elbow, ready to steady her if needed. Thank you, she murmured, suddenly breathless in a way that had nothing to do with her recent illness. Sam nodded, a faint color rising to his tan cheeks. You're welcome, Josephine. As they walked inside together, Josephine realized that for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. And that feeling, more than anything else, terrified her. The next morning, Josephine woke to the sounds of ranch life, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic chopping of wood. She dressed in her own clothes, which Mrs. Flores had washed and pressed, grateful to feel more like herself again. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of fresh coffee and biscuits. Mrs. Flores greeted her with a broad smile, ushering her to the table where a plate was already waiting. Mr. Sam is checking the north pasture fence with the men, she explained, pouring Josephine a cup of coffee. He said to tell you he will be back by midday to take you into town if you feel ready. Josephine nodded, though the prospect of leaving filled her with a strange reluctance. I should go. The school board has been more than patient. You could stay longer, Mrs. Flores suggested, her dark eyes knowing. The ranch is good for healing, fresh air, good food. I've imposed enough, Josephine said firmly, more to convince herself than Mrs. Flores. Besides, I need to start preparing for the school term. The children deserve a teacher who is ready when classes begin. Mrs. Flores made a non-committal sound and busied herself with kneading dough for the evening's bread. Josephine ate her breakfast slowly, savoring the last moments of peace before facing the scrutiny of Whispering Creek's residents. An unmarried pregnant schoolteacher would certainly raise eyebrows, no matter how progressive the town claimed to be. After breakfast, Josephine packed her meager belongings back into her carpet bag. She paused at the small mirror above the dresser, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the desperate figure who had collapsed on the trail days ago. There was color in her cheeks, a clarity in her eyes that had been missing since Thomas's death. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning from the mirror. Sam entered, hat in hand. He'd clearly just returned from his morning work. His shirt was dusty, and a light sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. "Mrs. Flores said you're ready to go into town." "Yes, I think it's time." Josephine gestured to her packed carpetbag. I'm most grateful for your hospitality, but I can't impose any longer. Sam stepped further into the room, his expression unreadable. It's no imposition. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. That's very kind, but the school board is expecting me, and I should get settled before classes begin. Josephine smoothed her skirt, avoiding his gaze. I understand the boarding house is quite comfortable. Mrs. Abernathy runs a clean establishment, but it's not exactly restful. She talks more than 10 women combined, and her cooking. Sam grimaced. Let's just say Mrs. Flores might spoil you for any other food. Josephine laughed despite herself. I'm sure I'll manage. Sam took another step closer. Josephine, he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. I want you to know that my offer stands. If you ever need anything at all, you only have to ask. His sincerity touched her deeply. Thank you, Sam. That means more than I can express. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. I'll hitch up the wagon. Meet you out front in 10 minutes. Josephine nodded, and he left, closing the door softly behind him. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat a rapid tattoo. What was happening to her? She barely knew this man, and yet the thought of leaving his ranch filled her with an inexplicable sadness. This is foolishness, she told herself firmly. You came west to be independent, not to fall under another man's protection. With renewed determination, Josephine grabbed her carpetbag and walked out to meet Sam. The ride into Whispering Creek took nearly an hour. Sam handled the team of horses with easy confidence, guiding the wagon over the rutted trail. Josephine sat beside him on the bench, a respectable distance between them, her carpetbag at her feet. As they traveled, Sam pointed out landmarks: a creek where the fishing was good, a stand of cottonwoods where wild turkeys roosted, the distant mountains where he sometimes hunted elk in the fall. Josephine listened, asking questions that revealed her Eastern upbringing and limited experience with the natural world. You mean you've never fished? Sam asked, incredulous. I grew up in Philadelphia, and Thomas considered outdoor pursuits uncouth, Josephine explained. The closest I came to nature was the city park on Sunday afternoons. Sam shook his head in wonder. You're in for quite an adjustment then. Whispering Creek isn't Philadelphia. That's precisely why I chose it, Josephine said. I needed a fresh start. Somewhere I could build a life on my own terms. Sam glanced at her profile, admiring her determination. It won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. They crested a rise, and Whispering Creek came into view, a small but growing settlement nestled in a valley. From this distance, Josephine could make out several dozen buildings, including a church spire and what must be the new schoolhouse at the edge of town. What do you think? Sam asked, reining the horses to a stop so she could take in the view. It's lovely, Josephine said honestly. The town looked clean and orderly, with broad streets and sidewalk signs of planning and prosperity that boded well for her future there. Sam flicked the reins and the horses started forward again. Whispering Creek is growing fast. The railroad's coming through next year, and there's talk of a silver strike in the hills. The town council is forward-thinking. They want culture and education to grow alongside commerce. Hence the new schoolhouse and the urgent need for a teacher, Josephine noted. Exactly. Mayor Thomas has 3 school-age children himself. He's been pushing for quality education since he took office. As they approached the town limits, Josephine became acutely aware of her appearance: travel-worn dress, hair hastily pinned up, and of course, her obvious pregnancy. She straightened her spine, determined to make a good first impression despite her circumstances. The main street was busy with midday activity. Men in business suits and laborers in work clothes moved purposefully between establishments. Women in modest day dresses shopped or chatted on the boardwalk. Several people called greetings to Sam, their curious gazes lingering on Josephine. "Word travels fast in small towns," Sam murmured. "Everyone already knows about finding you on the trail." "Wonderful," Josephine sighed. "I suppose that saves me from having to explain my dramatic arrival." Sam guided the wagon to a two-story building with a sign proclaiming Abernathy Boarding House. Before he could climb down to help her, the front door burst open, and a stout woman in a floral dress hurried out. "Mr. Zakowski, and this must be our new school teacher." Her voice carried across the street, drawing even more attention their way. "I'm Harriet Abernathy, my dear. We've been so worried since we heard about your ordeal." Sam helped Josephine down from the wagon, then retrieved her carpetbag. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Josephine Zeller." "So pleased to meet you, Mrs. Abernathy," Josephine said, extending her hand. Mrs. Abernathy clasped it between both of hers. "The pleasure is mine, dear. We're all so excited to have a proper teacher for our children. And don't you worry about your condition. My late sister was a midwife, and I've assisted with more births than I can count. You'll be in good hands when your time comes." Josephine felt her cheeks flush at the forthright mention of her pregnancy. "Thank you. That's very reassuring. Now, come inside and get settled. You must be exhausted after everything you've been through. I've prepared my best room for you faces east, so you'll get the morning sun but not the afternoon heat." Mrs. Abernathy finally released Josephine's hand and turned to Sam. "Will you be staying for lunch, Mr. Zakowski? I've made chicken and dumplings." "Thank you, madam, but I should get back to the ranch." Sam declined politely. He handed Josephine her carpetbag. "Mayor Thomas said he'd stop by later this afternoon to welcome you officially. The school board meeting is tomorrow at 10. "Thank you for everything, Sam," Josephine said, meaning far more than the ride into town. For a moment, Sam looked as though he wanted to say something more. Instead, he simply nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Remember what I said, Miss Zeller. If you need anything at all, I will," she promised. As Mrs. Abernathy ushered her inside, chattering about meals and laundry arrangements, Josephine glanced back to see Sam watching her from beside his wagon. Their eyes met briefly before he climbed up to the bench and took the reins. Josephine allowed herself one moment of regret before turning her attention to her new landlady and the next chapter of her life. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Josephine settled into life in Whispering Creek. The school board had welcomed her warmly, impressed by her credentials and teaching experience, despite some initial concerns about her delicate condition. Mayor Thomas, a progressive man who had studied at Harvard before moving west, assured the more conservative members that Josephine would be a valuable addition to their community. "My wife is already organizing a sewing circle to prepare for your baby's arrival," he told her after the meeting. "The women of Whispering Creek look after their own." The schoolhouse was completed just in time for the fall term. It was a simple but sturdy building with large windows that flooded the single classroom with light. 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old filled the pine benches on the first day, their faces a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and in the case of some older boys, defiance. Josephine met that defiance with calm authority, establishing rules and expectations while also demonstrating genuine interest in each child's abilities and circumstances. By the end of the first week, even the most reluctant students were participating in lessons. As September gave way to October, Josephine's pregnancy advanced, making the walk from the boarding house to the school increasingly challenging. Several fathers took turns driving her to and from school in their wagons or buggies, a courtesy that touched her deeply. She saw Sam occasionally in town, usually on Saturday afternoons when ranchers came in for supplies. They would exchange greetings, perhaps chat briefly about the weather or her students, but always with a certain formality that belied the connection they had formed during her stay at his ranch. Sometimes, Josephine caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher before he would tip his hat and continue on his way. On a crisp October morning, as Josephine was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard, a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw riders approaching at a gallop, 3 men, their faces concealed by bandanas. "Children," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart, "I want you all to move quietly to the back of the room and sit on the floor." The oldest student, 16-year-old William Porter, stood. "Miss Zeller, those look like the Delaney gang. They robbed the bank in Silverton last month." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you, William." All the more reason to stay calm and follow instructions. She moved to the door, locking it before joining the children at the back of the room. Outside, shouting erupted as the riders reached the town center. Gunshots followed, sending the children into frightened whimpers. Josephine gathered the youngest ones close, murmuring reassurances while her own heart pounded painfully against her ribs. The classroom door rattled violently as someone tried the handle, then pounded with what sounded like a gun butt. "Open up," a rough voice demanded. Josephine stood, placing herself between the door and the children. "This is a schoolhouse," she called, struggling to keep her voice from trembling. "There's nothing of value here except children's lives. Please move on." The pounding stopped, followed by hushed consultation. Then footsteps retreated. Relief washed over Josephine, but it was short-lived. Moments later, the window nearest the door shattered as the butt of a rifle smashed through it. A bearded face appeared in the opening. "Well, looky here. A schoolmarm and her little lambs." The man grinned, revealing blackened teeth. "Open the door, teacher, or I start shooting." Josephine felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. She glanced at the children huddled against the back wall, their eyes wide with fear. William Porter had positioned himself in front of the younger ones, his lanky teenage frame tense with protective instinct. "I'll open it," Josephine said, moving slowly toward the door. "But I beg you, don't harm the children." As she reached for the lock, more gunshots sounded from the street, followed by shouts and the thunder of hooves. The outlaw at the window cursed, ducking away. "It's Mr. Zakowski," William exclaimed, peering cautiously out a back window. "And Sheriff Miller, they're driving them off." The skirmish was brief but fierce. When silence finally fell, Josephine unlocked the door with shaking hands. Sheriff Miller appeared moments later, his weathered face grim. "Everyone all right in here, Miss Zeller?" "Yes, thanks to your timely arrival." Josephine scanned the street beyond him. "The outlaws. 2 ran off. 1's dead." The sheriff touched the brim of his hat. "Your friend Zakowski's got quite a shot. Dropped the leader from 30 yards when he turned to fire on me." Josephine's heart leapt. "Sam, Mr. Zakowski, is he hurt?" "Caught a bullet in the shoulder, but he's walking. Doc's seeing to him now." Sheriff Miller surveyed the frightened children. "School's dismissed for the day. Parents are already gathering at the church. I'll escort the young'uns there." After ensuring all the children were safely delivered to their families, Josephine hurried to Dr. Patterson's office, her pregnancy all but forgotten in her concern for Sam. She found him sitting on an examination table, shirt off, as the doctor bandaged his left shoulder. "Sam," she gasped, taking in the bloody cloth on the floor and the grim set of his jaw. He looked up, surprise giving way to something warmer. "Josephine, are you and the children all right? We're fine, thanks to you." She moved closer, distressed by the angry red wound visible beneath the doctor's ministrations. "But you're shot." "Just a graze," Sam said dismissively. "Barely broke the skin." "A graze that needed 12 stitches," Dr. Patterson corrected dryly. "You're lucky, Zakowski." An inch to the right and we'd be having a different conversation. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. "You could have been killed." Sam's eyes softened. "But I wasn't, and those Delaney boys won't be terrorizing any more towns." Dr. Patterson finished the bandaging and stepped back. "No riding or roping for at least 2 weeks. Keep the wound clean and dry. Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection." Sam nodded, reaching for his shirt with a wince. Josephine stepped forward. "Let me help." She held the shirt as he slipped his good arm through, then carefully eased it over his injured shoulder. Standing this close, she could smell the gunpowder that clung to him, mixed with leather and horses and something uniquely Sam. Her fingers brushed his bare skin as she helped him button the shirt, and she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with her pregnancy or his injury. "Thank you," Sam said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I should be thanking you," Josephine replied. "You saved us all today." "I was in town delivering a horse to the livery when the shooting started." Sam's jaw tightened. "When I heard it was the school being threatened, I couldn't let anything happen to you. To the children," he added quickly. Josephine helped him into his vest, acutely conscious of their proximity and the intensity of his gaze. "Still, you risked your life. That's not something I can ever repay." "I don't want repayment, Josephine." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. "Doctor." Patterson cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Miss Zeller, perhaps you should sit down. All this excitement can't be good for your condition." Josephine reluctantly stepped back, allowing Sam to finish dressing himself. Only then did she realize how exhausted she felt, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. She sank into a nearby chair, one hand automatically cradling her belly. "Are you in pain?" Sam asked sharply, noticing the gesture. "No, just tired. And the baby is very active today. Doctor." Patterson approached, medical concern replacing his earlier awkwardness. "May I?" At Josephine's nod, he placed his hands on her abdomen, feeling for the baby's position. "Strong heartbeat. Everything seems normal, but I'd recommend rest for the remainder of the day. Your blood pressure is likely elevated from the stress." "I'll take you back to the boarding house," Sam said, standing carefully to test his injured shoulder. "You need rest yourself," Josephine protested. "I'm fine to drive a wagon." Sam's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I'm not letting you walk across town alone after what just happened." Dr. Patterson looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his weathered features. "Miss Zeller, I believe Mr. Zakowski is right. And Sam, after you've delivered the lady safely, I expect you to follow my orders and rest that shoulder." "Yes, Doc," Sam agreed, though Josephine suspected he had no intention of resting anytime soon. Outside, the town was returning to normal, though groups of men still patrolled the streets, rifles in hand. Sam helped Josephine into his wagon, treating her as if she were made of glass despite his own injury. As they drove toward the boarding house, Josephine found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. Today, he had nearly died protecting her and her students. The realization sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the October chill. "You're cold," Sam observed, immediately shrugging out of his coat with only a slight grimace for his injured shoulder. "No, I'm fine." Josephine began, but he was already draping the coat around her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her, along with his scent. "Thank you," she said softly. They rode in companionable silence for a few moments before Sam spoke again. "Josephine, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes." "Would you consider—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "That is, I was wondering if you might want to come out to the ranch for Sunday dinner. Mrs. Flores asks about you constantly, and the place hasn't been the same since." He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "Since I left." Josephine supplied, warmth spreading through her chest. Sam nodded, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "I know it's not proper, an unmarried woman visiting a bachelor's home, but Mrs. Flores would be there as chaperone. And I'd love to," Josephine interrupted, surprising herself with her eagerness. Sam turned to her then, a smile transforming his face. "Really?" "Yes, really," she laughed. "I've missed Mrs. Flores's cooking, and the ranch. And you," she added silently. "I'll come for you around 11 on Sunday then," Sam said, the tension in his shoulders easing visibly. As they arrived at the boarding house, Mrs. Abernathy burst out the front door, having clearly been watching for their arrival. "Miss Zeller, thank the Lord you're safe. When I heard about those dreadful outlaws at the school," she broke off, noticing Sam helping Josephine down from the wagon. "Mr. Zakowski, they're saying you shot one of those villains dead." "Just doing what needed doing, madam," Sam said modestly. "Miss Zeller needs rest after her ordeal. Doctor's orders. Of course, of course. Come inside, dear. I'll bring tea and something for your nerves." Mrs. Abernathy ushered Josephine toward the door, then paused to address Sam. "Will you join us, Mr. Zakowski?" Sam shook his head. "Thank you, but I need to check on my horse at the livery. He's not used to gunfire." Josephine turned at the door. "Sunday at 11. Sam nodded, a private smile passing between them. "I'll be here." As Mrs. Abernathy led her inside, chattering about the excitement and how everyone in town was talking about the brave schoolteacher who protected her students, Josephine found her thoughts lingering on Sunday and the promise it held. Sunday dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Josephine dressed with particular care in a deep blue dress that complemented her eyes and somewhat disguised her advancing pregnancy. At nearly 7 months, her condition was impossible to hide completely, but the cut of the dress was flattering despite her rounded belly. Mrs. Abernathy watched her preparations with knowing eyes. My, such care for a simple Sunday dinner," she remarked as Josephine pinned her hair into a neat but becoming style. "It's the first social invitation I've accepted since arriving," Josephine replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I want to make a good impression." "On Mrs. Flores or on Mr. Zakowski?" Mrs. Abernathy asked shrewdly. Josephine met her landlady's gaze in the mirror. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone with eyes in her head," Mrs. Abernathy said kindly, "and I don't blame you one bit. Samuel Zakowski is one of the finest men in the territory, hardworking, honest, and not hard on the eyes either." "He's been very kind to me," Josephine said carefully. "Kind, yes, and something more, I'd wager." Mrs. Abernathy adjusted a lock of Josephine's hair. "The way he looks at you." "Well, I've seen that look before. My Harold looked at me that way for 43 years. Josephine's heart fluttered at the implication. "I'm in no position to encourage suitors, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm a widow expecting another man's child. Pshaw, this is the West, dear. People start over all the time. Besides, a baby needs a father, and that child of yours couldn't do better than Sam Zakowski." Before Josephine could respond, a knock at the front door announced Sam's arrival. Mrs. Abernathy patted her shoulder. "Just something to think about." Sam waited in the parlor, hat in hand, looking splendid in clean denims, a pressed shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His injured arm was still in a sling, but his face lit up when Josephine entered the room. "You look beautiful," he said simply, the admiration in his eyes making her cheeks warm. "Thank you. How is your shoulder? Healing well? Doc says I can likely dispense with the sling in another week." Sam offered his good arm. "Shall we?" The ride to the ranch was pleasant, the autumn landscape a riot of gold and crimson. Josephine found herself relaxing in Sam's company, their conversation flowing easily from the progress of her students to local politics, to books they had both enjoyed. "I never expected to find a fellow Dickens enthusiast in the Arizona Territory," Josephine admitted after discovering they shared a fondness for David Copperfield. "My mother insisted we all be educated despite our circumstances," Sam explained. "She'd been a teacher before marrying my father. Even when we were living in a two-room cabin with a dirt floor, she read to us every night. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Sam agreed, a hint of grief still shadowing his eyes. "You would have liked her, and she would have adored you." The simple statement touched Josephine deeply. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I," Sam said softly. They crested the final rise, and the ranch came into view. Josephine felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the sight, not just appreciation for its beauty, but a sense of homecoming that took her by surprise. Mrs. Flores greeted them effusively, embracing Josephine with genuine warmth before scolding Sam for driving with his injured arm. "You will tear the stitches, and then what? More trouble for everyone." "Yes, madam," Sam said meekly, winking at Josephine over the housekeeper's head. Dinner was a festive affair. Mrs. Flores had outdone herself with roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the kitchen garden, and an apple pie that filled the house with its cinnamon fragrance. Throughout the meal, Josephine caught Sam watching her with an expression that made her heart race. There was tenderness there and something deeper that she dared not name. After dinner, Mrs. Flores shooed them from the kitchen. "Go, show Miss Josephine the new foals. I will clean up." "Would you like to see them?" Sam asked. "We had 3 born last week, the finest I've bred yet." "I'd love to," Josephine agreed, grateful for the opportunity to be alone with him, if only for a short while. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they walked to the corral where the mares and their foals were kept. The young horses frolicked on spindly legs, their mothers watching indulgently. "They're beautiful," Josephine breathed, leaning on the fence rail beside Sam. "They'll be the foundation of my new breeding program," he explained, pride evident in his voice. "Crossed my quarter horses with some Arabian stock I bought last year. Should produce animals with both strength and endurance." "You're building something remarkable here," Josephine observed, glancing around the prosperous ranch. "A true legacy." Sam turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "A legacy needs someone to inherit it." Josephine's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Sam, let me speak, Josephine, please." When she nodded, he continued, "These past weeks without you here have been empty. I find myself riding into town on the flimsiest of pretexts, just hoping for a glimpse of you. When I heard those shots at the school and thought you might be hurt." He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. "I've thought about you too," Josephine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should." Sam took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "I know your situation is complicated. I know you came west to be independent, but I can't help how I feel." "And how is that?" Josephine asked, needing to hear the words. "I love you, Josephine. I think I've loved you since I found you on that trail, since I carried you in my arms and promised you'd never walk alone." Sam's voice was rough with emotion. I want to keep that promise not just to you but to your child as well." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "Sam, I don't know what to say. This is so unexpected." "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "I understand if you need time, if you're not ready." "It's not that," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "It's just, are you certain? Taking on another man's child is a huge responsibility." Sam's expression softened. "That baby is a part of you, Josephine. How could I not love any part of you?" He placed his free hand gently on her rounded belly. "Besides, I meant what I said that day on the trail. Nobody should walk alone in this life, especially not you and especially not this little one." As if in response to his words, the baby kicked strongly against his palm. Sam's eyes widened in wonder. "Was that?" "Yes," Josephine laughed through her tears. "I think someone's trying to make their opinion known." Sam smiled, his face alight with joy. "Smart already. Must take after their mother." In that moment, looking into Sam's eyes with his hand resting protectively over her unborn child, Josephine knew her heart had already made its decision. The independence she had sought in coming west didn't mean facing life alone. It meant having the freedom to choose her own path, to build a life with someone who valued her strength rather than diminishing it. "Sam," she began, her voice steadier now, "when you found me on that trail, I was at my lowest point. I thought I had nothing left but my determination to survive for my baby's sake. But you showed me there was still kindness in the world, still people worth trusting." She drew a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you too." The words hung between them for a heartbeat before Sam pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of both her pregnancy and his injured shoulder. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all that could be. Josephine melted into him, feeling for the first time in months, perhaps years, that she had truly found home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Josephine." "Not right away. I know you need time, and there's the baby coming and your teaching position. But say you'll be my wife, that you'll make this ranch your home, that we'll raise this child and others together." "Yes," Josephine whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes to all of it." As the sun set over the Arizona mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Sam sealed their promise with another kiss. And Josephine knew with absolute certainty that neither she nor her child would ever walk alone again. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of joy and preparation. With Sam's encouragement, Josephine continued teaching, determined to fulfill her commitment to the school board until her confinement began. The town's reaction to their engagement was overwhelmingly positive. Sam was respected throughout the community, and Josephine had quickly endeared herself to parents and children alike. "It's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," Mrs. Abernathy declared when they announced their news. Found half dead on the trail, carried to safety by a handsome rancher Y. It's like something from a novel. Even Mayor Thomas offered his blessing, though in more practical terms. "We'll need a replacement teacher for when the baby comes, of course, but perhaps you might consider returning part-time afterward. The children adore you, and educated women are too valuable a resource to waste entirely on domestic duties." "Samuel and I have discussed it," Josephine confirmed. "Once the baby is a few months old, I could teach 3 days a week. Mrs. Porter has offered to help with childcare. Her William is graduating this term, and she says she misses having little ones about." As November turned to December, Josephine divided her time between the schoolhouse, preparing for the baby's arrival, and planning a small Christmas wedding. She and Sam had decided not to wait until after the birth. They wanted their child to enter the world with a father's name, sparing it the stigma that might otherwise follow. Besides, Sam had said, holding her close one Sunday afternoon as they sat on the porch of what would soon be their home together, I don't want to wait a day longer than necessary to call you my wife. Dr. Patterson, monitoring Josephine's pregnancy with careful attention, pronounced her healthy despite her earlier ordeal. The baby's positioned properly, good strong heartbeat. You're carrying high, which old wives would say means a boy, but I've seen that wives' tale disproven plenty of times. Boy or girl, it doesn't matter, Josephine said, smiling as Sam helped her down from the examination table. As long as our child is healthy. Our child, Sam repeated softly, the wonder in his voice making Josephine's heart swell. From the beginning, he had embraced her unborn baby as his own, never once treating it as an obligation or a burden. The wedding was set for December 23rd, allowing Sam's brothers time to travel to Whispering Creek for the ceremony. One by one, they arrived: Michael from Denver, David from Santa Fe, Joshua from his cavalry post in Texas. Each embraced Josephine warmly, welcoming her into the Zakowski family without reservation. "You've brought the light back into Sam's eyes," Michael told her the evening before the wedding as they gathered at the ranch for dinner. "After Mother died, we feared he might lose himself in work and solitude. I'm the fortunate one," Josephine insisted. "Your brother saved not just my life, but my faith in humanity." The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful, held in the town's small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for Christmas. Josephine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Flores and the ladies of the sewing circle had labored over, designed to accommodate her 8 months pregnant figure while still looking elegant and bridal. Sam, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such profound love that Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they spoke their vows, Josephine felt the baby move restlessly, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Sam's hand trembled slightly as he slid the gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, polished to a new shine. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Sam's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Josephine caught Mrs. Abernathy dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while even the usually stoic Sheriff Miller looked suspiciously misty. The reception was held at the town hall, transformed by the Women's Auxiliary into a festive space with evergreen garlands and candles. There was dancing, though Josephine was limited to slow waltzes, and a feast that showcased the culinary talents of every household in Whispering Creek. "Are you happy, Mrs. Zakowski?" Sam asked as they swayed gently to the music, one hand resting on the swell of her belly. "Completely," Josephine assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." Sam pressed a kiss to her temple. "There's just one thing missing." Josephine pulled back to look at him questioningly. "Our little one," Sam explained. "I can't wait to meet them." As if on cue, Josephine felt a sharp pain ripple across her abdomen, different from the usual movements of the baby. She gasped, clutching Sam's arm. "Josephine," alarm crossed his features. "What is it?" "I think," she broke off as another pain seized her. "I think the baby might be coming." Sam's eyes widened. "But it's too early, only by a few weeks," Josephine said, trying to remain calm despite the growing intensity of the contractions. "Dr. Patterson said that's not unusual for a first child." Sam immediately went into action, finding the doctor among the guests while Joshua helped Josephine to a chair. Within minutes, the festivities had transformed into an organized operation to get the bride home to the ranch for the birth. "No time," Dr. Patterson declared after a brief examination in Mrs. Abernathy's parlor, where they'd stopped en route. "This baby's coming fast, must be eager to join the celebration." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination for Josephine. Sam never left her side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when she thought she couldn't continue. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as the labor intensified. "You can do this, Josephine. We're doing this together." Just as the church bells rang midnight heralding Christmas Eve, a lusty cry filled the room. Dr. Patterson's face appeared above Josephine, beaming. "Congratulations, Mrs. Zakowski. You have a daughter." Tears streamed down Josephine's face as the tiny, red-faced infant was placed on her chest. "She's perfect," she whispered, counting fingers and toes with wonder. Sam's face was wet with tears of his own as he gazed at his new family. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother. What will you name her?" Dr. Patterson asked as he completed his work. Josephine looked at Sam, who nodded encouragement. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on a final choice. "Sarah," Josephine decided. "Sarah Elizabeth Zakowski." Sarah had been Sam's mother's name, and Elizabeth was Josephine's mother's. "A fine name for a Christmas Eve baby," the doctor approved, "and quite healthy despite her early arrival." Later, when the doctor had gone and the house was quiet, Sam sat beside Josephine on the bed, cradling little Sarah in his strong, capable hands. The newborn looked impossibly tiny against his broad palms, her rosebud mouth working in her sleep. One tiny fist escaped from her swaddling. "I never knew it was possible to love someone I just met so completely," Sam marveled, his voice hushed with awe. "That's how I felt about you," Josephine admitted. "From the moment you found me on that trail, something in my heart recognized something in yours." Sam looked up, his eyes filled with tenderness. "When I promised you'd never walk alone, I had no idea how much those words would change my life." "Our lives," Josephine corrected gently. "All three of us." Sam carefully transferred Sarah back to Josephine's arms, then stretched out beside them on the bed, his arm protectively encircling them both. "Merry Christmas, my loves." "Merry Christmas, husband," Josephine murmured, leaning into his embrace as their daughter slept peacefully between them. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting Whispering Creek with a blanket of white, a rare Christmas gift in the Arizona territory, and a fitting benediction for new beginnings. The years that followed brought changes, both expected and surprising to the Zakowski family. Sarah grew from a strong-willed infant into a curious, bright-eyed toddler with her mother's chestnut curls and her father's blue eyes. Sam doted on her shamelessly, carrying her on his shoulders to check the cattle, crafting a tiny rocking horse for her second birthday, and reading to her each night from the growing collection of books that filled their home. True to her word, Josephine returned to teaching part-time when Sarah was 6 months old, bringing innovation and enthusiasm to the Whispering Creek School. Her students thrived under her guidance, and within 2 years, the school board had approved the addition of a second classroom and teacher to accommodate the town's growing population. The ranch prospered as well. Sam's breeding program produced horses sought after throughout the territory, and his carefully managed cattle operation expanded steadily. With the arrival of the railroad, Whispering Creek boomed, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. In the spring of 1882, when Sarah was 3, Josephine discovered she was expecting again. The news filled their home with joy, and Sarah, after some initial confusion, became fascinated with the idea of a baby brother or sister. "How did the baby get in there?" she asked one evening, patting Josephine's still flat stomach with solemn concentration. Sam choked on his coffee while Josephine suppressed a smile. "God puts babies in mama's tummies when it's time for a family to grow," she explained, choosing simplicity over scientific accuracy for now. "Did God put me in there too?" Sarah persisted. "Yes, sweetheart," Josephine answered, meeting Sam's gaze over their daughter's head. No matter Sarah's biological parentage, in every way that mattered, she was theirs, the child of their hearts, if not entirely of their bodies. As if reading her thoughts, Sam reached across the table to squeeze Josephine's hand. "And we've been thankful every day since," he added. Unlike Sarah's dramatic Christmas Eve arrival, their son entered the world on a peaceful September morning after a relatively easy labor. They named him Thomas Samuel, honoring both Josephine's first husband and the man who had become her true partner in life. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked Sam late one night as they stood on the porch, watching a meteor shower streak across the desert sky. Young Thomas slept in his cradle inside, while Sarah had finally succumbed to slumber after insisting she was old enough to stay up for the celestial display. "Regret what?" Sam asked, his arm warm around her waist. "Taking on another man's child, taking on me with all my complications." Sam turned her to face him, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Josephine Zakowski, not once in all these years have I regretted a single moment with you or our children. Sarah may not have my blood, but she has my heart, just as surely as Thomas does." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Besides, who's to say it wasn't always meant to be this way? That every step in our lives, even the painful ones, wasn't leading us to each other?" Josephine leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed as always by the depth of his love. "When I think of how close I came to dying on that trail." "But you didn't," Sam reminded her, his arms tightening protectively. "You fought, just as you've always fought for what matters. It's one of the countless reasons I love you." "And I love you, Cowboy," Josephine murmured, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "For carrying me when I couldn't walk and for walking beside me every day since." The sound of a small, indignant cry from inside the house interrupted their moment. Sam chuckled. "Your son has your timing." "And your lungs," Josephine countered with a smile. "Come on, let's go see what he wants." Hand in hand, they returned to the warmth of their home, to the children who were their legacy and their joy. Outside, the vast Arizona sky continued its celestial display. Stars falling like blessings on the ranch they had built together, a sanctuary created from love, determination, and a promise made on a dusty trail years before. "You'll never walk alone." In the autumn of 1892, 14 years after that fateful day on the trail to Whispering Creek, the Zakowski Ranch hosted its annual Harvest Festival. What had begun as a small gathering for ranch hands and neighbors had grown into one of the most anticipated events in the county, drawing visitors from as far as Tucson. The ranch itself had expanded considerably, now encompassing over 10,000 acres, with modern facilities for the horse breeding operation that had become nationally recognized. The main house, originally a modest structure, had been enlarged to accommodate the growing family and frequent guests, though Sam and Josephine had been careful to preserve its welcoming character rather than creating an ostentatious mansion like those favored by some wealthy cattlemen. As twilight descended, lanterns illuminated the yard where trestle tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every attending family. A small band of local musicians played on a platform constructed for the occasion, their fiddles and guitars enticing couples to dance on the packed earth of the courtyard. Josephine, now 42, but still striking with only a few strands of silver threading her chestnut hair, stood watching the festivities with satisfaction. Sarah, 17 and the image of her mother with Sam's blue eyes, was helping younger children bob for apples. 14-year-old Thomas and his 12-year-old brother James were engaged in a horseshoe pitching contest with other boys their age, while 9-year-old Emma sat nearby, plaiting daisy chains with her friends. "Quite a gathering," remarked Mrs. Abernathy, now in her 70s but still spry as she joined Josephine. "Your Sarah has grown into such a beauty. I expect you'll be planning a wedding before long." Josephine smiled but shook her head. Not if her father has anything to say about it. Sam's convinced no young man is good enough for her. She paused, watching as her eldest daughter laughed, her head thrown back in a way that suddenly, painfully reminded Josephine of her youth. "Besides, Sarah has plans. She wants to attend the women's college in Denver next fall." Following in her mother's footsteps, Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Education is a fine thing for a young woman, though I still say she'll have suitors lining up from here to Texas." "Already does," Josephine admitted. "Sam's been cleaning his rifle on the porch every time young William Porter comes calling." Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "William's a fine boy man now, I suppose. His mother says he's been sweet on Sarah since they were children." "She could do worse," Josephine acknowledged. "But I want her to have choices. I never had to see more of the world before settling down." "You've given her that gift," Mrs. Abernathy said softly. "You and Sam both the freedom to choose her path." A commotion at the far end of the yard drew their attention. A wagon had arrived, and from it emerged Sam's brothers and their families, late but welcome additions to the celebration. Michael, now a respected surgeon in Denver, had brought his wife and 3 children. David, whose mercantile business had expanded into a department store chain across 3 territories, arrived with his wife and their twins. Joshua, recently retired from the cavalry with the rank of colonel, accompanied them with his Spanish wife, Carmen. Josephine excused herself to greet the newcomers, embracing each with genuine affection. The Zakowski brothers had remained close despite the distances separating them, gathering at least once a year at the ranch that had been their childhood home. "Where's that husband of yours?" Joshua asked after the initial flurry of greetings. "Probably in the barn, showing off the new stallion to anyone who'll listen," Josephine laughed. "You know how he gets about his horses." As if summoned by her words, Sam appeared from the direction of the barn, leading a group of admiring cattlemen. At 46, he was still a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair now liberally streaked with gray, lines of experience etched around his eyes and mouth. When he caught sight of his brothers, his face lit with pleasure. Josephine watched as the brothers embraced, slapping backs and exchanging good-natured insults. Their bond had weathered time and distance, growing stronger rather than weaker over the years. It was one of the many things she loved about the family she had married into, their unwavering loyalty to one another. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and soon the yard was filled with dancing couples. Sam found her watching the revelry and extended his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Zakowski?" "Always," Josephine replied, placing her hand in his. As they joined the other dancers, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate young widow to respected teacher and rancher's wife, mother of 4, pillar of the community, it was a transformation she could never have imagined on that dusty trail 14 years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the dance. "You've got that far-away look." "I was remembering the day we met," Josephine admitted. "How lost I was, how afraid." Sam's arm tightened around her waist. "You were never lost, Josephine. You were finding your way even then." "With a little help," she reminded him, smiling up at the man who had become the center of her world. "We helped each other," Sam said simply. "We still do." As the music ended, Mayor Thomas, still serving after all these years though now with a full head of white hair, called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to our hosts, Samuel and Josephine Zakowski, who have opened their home and their hearts to this community for 14 years. Glasses were raised as a chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," the mayor continued, "it gives me great pleasure to announce that our town council has unanimously voted to name the new library building after Josephine Zakowski, in recognition of her tireless efforts to promote education in Whispering Creek." Josephine gasped, genuinely surprised. The library project had been her passion for the past 3 years, fundraising, selecting books, even designing the reading room where she hoped to inspire a love of literature in the town's children. But she had never expected such recognition. Speech. Someone called, and soon others took up the cry. Flustered but pleased, Josephine stepped forward. "I'm honored beyond words," she began. "But this library doesn't belong to me, it belongs to all of us, to our children and grandchildren, to the future of Whispering Creek." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I came west 14 years ago, I carried little except hope and determination. What I found here, what all of us have built together, is a community that values not just prosperity but wisdom, not just survival but joy." Her eyes found Sam in the crowd, his face filled with pride and love. "Someone once promised me that I'd never walk alone. That promise has been kept, not just by one man, but by all of you who have become my extended family." She raised her glass. "So I toast not myself, but all of us and the bonds that hold us together, stronger than blood, more enduring than hardship. To Whispering Creek, to Whispering Creek," the crowd echoed, glasses lifted to the star-filled sky. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Sam found Josephine sitting on a hay bale near the dying bonfire, watching the embers glow. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Proud of you," he said quietly. "The Josephine Zakowski Library has a nice ring to it." "I'm still in shock," she admitted. "There are so many others who deserve recognition more than I do." "Name one," Sam challenged. Josephine squeezed his hand. "You, for starters. This ranch, the breeding program, the jobs you've created, you've done more for this community than I ever could." "We've done it together," Sam corrected. "Everything good in my life has come from that day on the trail. Finding you was the beginning of everything." They sat in companionable silence, watching as their children helped with the cleanup, Sarah directing her younger siblings with gentle authority. "She reminds me of you," Sam observed, following Josephine's gaze to their eldest daughter. "Same determination, same heart." "She reminds me of both of us," Josephine said, "and of herself. She's her own person, Sam, always has been." "I know," Sam sighed. "And I know she needs to go to that college, even if the thought of her being so far away tears me up inside." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "She'll come back. This is home." "Promise?" Sam asked, only half joking. "I can't promise for her," Josephine said honestly. "But I know she loves this place as much as we do, and even if her path takes her elsewhere, she'll always carry a piece of it with her." Sam nodded, accepting the truth of her words. "You know, when my father died and left us with nothing, I never imagined having all this." He gestured to the ranch, the house, their children. "I thought I'd be lucky just to survive, to keep my brothers and mother fed. And now look at you." Josephine said softly. Samuel Zakowski, respected rancher, loving father, pillar of the community. Don't forget devoted husband, Sam added, turning to face her. In the firelight, his eyes were as blue and earnest as they had been the day he'd found her. Everything I am, everything I have, I owe to you, Josephine. That works both ways, Cowboy, she replied, using the endearment that had become private between them over the years. We built this life together one day at a time. Sam cupped her face in his calloused hands, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. As they kissed beneath the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, their home, their family, their legacy, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that the desperate young widow who had collapsed on the trail to Whispering Creek had not been lost at all. She had been finding her way home,